welcome everybody and thank you guys for joining me again. My name is Wilkie and I'm here with the next Void/Abyss Dungeon guide for Yorn's Forgotten Forge, which is the second one. Very similarly to the Road of Sorrow, this consists of two bosses that you have to clear and a bunch of trash mobs in between. So let's not really worry about the trash mobs, but dive right into the first boss fight. As usual, I did record this in my Trials of the Abyss runs, but the mechanics are the same. The first thing that you encounter with this boss is that one of the players gets a mark or a sort of bomb that I'd like to call it, and that explodes after a few seconds of a countdown. You definitely want to move out of harm's way if you're the player that is being marked with that AoE. You yourself don't get any damage from it, but you can hurt your teammates quite badly with it and also cause a knockdown. So definitely move out of harm's way. In my scenario here, I just moved to the bottom left, so nobody got hurt. In later stages of the fight, there's 2 or even 3 players that get this AoE around them, so spreading out is much more important later on. Also, don't worry about the few seconds of not being able to attack the boss. Damage usually isn't an issue with this boss fight. It's more about not dying and not taking extra damage, and that is definitely something you do want to avoid. It's not overly complex, just make sure you don't actually have someone inside the circle. They can overlap, very similarly to patent voids, but just make sure you don't actually hurt somebody unless you absolutely have to. The second thing to worry about during this fight are the Wyverns. Those will be spawned twice during the fight. The first spawn occurs somewhere around 8 to 7 HP bars. The second spawn along the lines of 3 to 2 HP bars. This obviously depends on your clear speed, so your stations or your HP bars may vary a little bit up and down. They don't really have any mechanic linked to them that would make you wipe the fight if you don't dispose of them. However, they come with a large threat of AoE abilities that can cover large portions of the arena that you're fighting in. Also, their damage output is not to be underestimated, so it's in your best interest to actually mop them up as quickly as you can. Ignore the boss for a while, just focus on the 2 Wyverns and then proceed the boss. AoE awakenings are very good and suitable to dispose of them quickly. If you have a team with a lot of AoE awakenings, make sure that you don't use them all in the first spawn, but try to use 1 or 2 awakenings for the first time they spawn, and another one when the second wave of Wyverns will be spawned in. However, just focusing your high DPS skills on them will be able to take care of them just as fine. The last thing to worry about during this fight is pretty much after you've dealt with the second pair of Wyverns. He will appear with an Impairment bar and get a lot of damage reduction in the process. So your goal now is to whack him as much as possible with Impairment skills or bombs if you really desire, though I don't really recommend bringing bombs. It's not that crazy here, as you don't really have a timed issue. Just impair him. Once he's impaired, he'll go into the typical down state. During that down state, he will still have his damage reduction buff on. So don't be fooled and don't use your awakenings when he gets knocked down, but wait for him to actually get back up and watch his buff bar. Once the buffs are gone, you're free to attack again. So if you saved your ultimates for the last piece of damage, just make sure you wait until his damage buff or damage reduction buff is actually gone. Otherwise, you're going to waste your awakening and not deal a lot of damage. So going over to the second boss, there's interestingly also only 3 key features that I think are worth mentioning, aside from his typical don't take too much damage, don't get hit too often. This fight can be a little bit difficult as he has a rather big HP pool and his damage, especially in later phases, can be quite problematic. So dodging or surviving is actually more important than trying to do rapid DPS, especially since he's giving you quite a few DPS openings over the course of the fight. So prepare to not go overly ham and just use the damage windows you get. The first thing that I'd like to mention is his counter stance or counter move. Very easily detectable by the red glowing aura / ball around his body. You can actually just stay near him. Typically people spread out and move out of the AoE, because sometimes people are unaware of the mechanic or still are inside of a move, so they can't trigger the counter. The counter doesn't instantly fire if you hit him during that stance, but there is a damage threshold to it. Still, triggering the counter will not only deal AoE damage around him, but also reset his Impairment bar, prolonging the fight and increasing the risk of actually people taking damage or even dying. So it's in your best interest. Don't trigger the counter whenever you see the red aura around him. Just stop attacking for a couple seconds. You don't have to move outside. You can. It's basically just a safety measurement. But if you're confident that your team doesn't trigger it, just stay close, wait for the counter to stop, and then proceed to attack again. So the next mechanic that you should be aware of is when he jumps into the center and spawns 2 clones of himself. The mechanic itself revolves around the color of the orb that the boss himself holds up above his head. In this scenario here in this video, we're taking a look at an orange/red orb that corresponds to the right one, which, as you can see, you can match the colors there. And your goal is now to kill that right colored clone. Failure to do so will actually result in a party wipe, so this is a mechanic that you have to do. Once you actually destroyed or killed the clone successfully, there will be a safe zone spawning exactly where the clone died. Standing inside of that, you'll get a buff that will protect you from the coming wipe attack. Once that's done, you can proceed to attack the boss again, and that's all about this. Necessarily, if you have the white orb above the head appear, then you gotta kill the white one instead. Mechanically, it doesn't change anything. The white mechanic is gonna look the same. Instead of a red circle, you're gonna see a white circle, but you definitely have to get that safe zone going. If you don't, you will actually die. The last thing to be wary of is the classic Impairment. This is not to be confused with the purple bar at the top, but he has an actual mechanic where you can see the bar appear below the boss, the orange one. And from there on out, it's your typical use your Impairment skills, use bombs if you have trouble to clear the Impairment fast enough. However, typically it's not too crazy. He does stand there quite a bit, but you definitely need to solve this Impairment check. Otherwise, it's going to result in another wipe. This is also one of the biggest, if not the biggest, damage window he will get you. So once you actually impaired him, you're free to use ultimates or anything for, I think, a good 4 or 5 seconds. So pretty much anybody is able to use any of your hard-hitting abilities during that window. As you can see here, I just popped my ultimate to deal some drastic damage. But like I said, nothing too fancy. Just use your impairment skills and bombs if necessary. And there you have it. That's pretty much all for the crazy or slash game-breaking or wipe mechanics of the 2 bosses in the Forgotten Forge. As usual, I do hope this was helpful. If I lost you somewhere, if this was confusing, then feel free to let me know in the comments or anywhere as you choose. Last but not least, if you want to see me live on Twitch, I also stream regularly on Mondays and irregularly on other days as well on my Twitch, so feel free to check that link out in the description below. Last but not least, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you guys next time.